So Black Boy Heartbreak, where we had some very interesting conversations around love and heartbreak and all of that kind of stuff. Some of the starrings of the film are here. But before I get to them, I actually want to ask the ladies who are in attendance for their initial thoughts and impressions and how what was spoken about landed for you, right? Because that's the whole point of part of the reason why we made what we made, right? Because it's something that black men don't talk about often. And we can sit there and, as you saw, for more than 2 hours carry on. So, you workshop le, Pedro. So, I'm going to. Can I just throw the mic to whoever? No, I can hold it. It's not a problem.
So actually, Marcel asked me, like, what did I think initially? And for me, what I realized is that you guys were very, like, you didn't want to express your thoughts or what you think about women in general freely. You guys had a lot of disclaimers. Like, you were too concerned about what might the backlash be for everything you said. So I think that also speaks to maybe guys nowadays or men in general can't express themselves just like, especially on the internet, freely. I think if it was a group of women, we would have been talking men are trash, like whatever it is that comes to mind, we would have spoken freely without worrying about backlash. And I think, yeah, that's what I got. You guys were very concerned about what might be the repercussions of the things that you were saying. You were very worried. Yeah, I can tell. I can tell that you guys are very concerned. So I'm like, shame. I feel bad for you guys for that. And maybe that also speaks to how you guys can't be really vulnerable. And part of that is being able to express how you truly feel about matters. Yeah.
Other reflections?
To emphasize and to second what you just said, I think men are easily cancelled on internet, on everywhere, especially when they share their true thoughts and their true feelings. Whereas women can say whatever. Like, sometimes I watch the things that women say on the internet and I'm embarrassed to be part of this group, but they say it freely, they say it like without judgment, and it's like, yes, go girl, you deserve this, you should do this. But because, and it's a concern we had with Marcel during the filming, right? Where like, are the guys going to be free enough with us in the room? And I think you guys didn't even think we were in the room, but you still had the disclaimers. You were still, there was a part of you that instinctively was holding back. And we don't give men enough space, enough room to just be without consequence. Women have no consequence for what they say. Because I'm a woman, I can say anything and I will not be cancelled. I will not be, maybe like, what's the word, attacked for my opinions. But men are attacked twofolds, threefolds more than women are. So just to back up what you were saying, with or without us in the room, I feel like because of the disclaimers, men were like, okay, yes, I can say this, finally I'm with my boys, but Konja, yes, this is recorded and I have a person and I have a mother, I have a sister, but I need to, like tiptoeing. We don't care if you have a mother, father, brother, person. You say what you feel. And I think men need more spaces where they can say what they feel without the fear of judgment, without the fear of consequence. So, yeah.
Before I go to the gents, one of the questions or reflections I'm very curious to hear from ladies is, it was quite a lot of stuff that was spoken about. What are your reflections about, based on what the men said, how walking out of this room, the way you relate to men now changes? Yeah, whether it's a partner, whether it's a brother, whether it's umalume and all of this kind of stuff. Seeing what you've seen, as just a sliver of probably what's going on in men's minds. Yeah, don't rush all at once.
Okay, first of all, disclaimer is I don't have the answer right now, but I'm pondering, right? The question is, where is a space that men can actually be themselves? Because social media badgers them, right? In the room, they're complaining to say, you know, my woman doesn't understand me. My mother doesn't understand me. And it worries me actually, I mean, to your sentiments, to say, how can I play a part to make it a safe space for them? Whether I'm a sister, I'm a lover, I'm a colleague, I'm a boss, I'm a whatever. You know, I'm trying to ask myself, how can we make it easier for them? That's what I'm walking away with, to say we need to make a difference, and it's within us, I think, because we seem to be the other party. And I actually appreciate the fact that we can have such forums where we can hear the other side. I've never heard black men speak like this. And for me, that's a big plus. Thank you, Lindy. And keep on going, because you don't know what else you can unfold behind the black men. And can you please one day extend it to the other party? Because you don't know what else. We speak a lot, but you don't know what we don't speak about. But not to derail the conversation, but just to say, I mean, big ups to the guys that showed up tonight. And may they hear that, you know, it's not intentional. It really isn't. I don't think anyone that loves you would want for you to feel pain from you expressing your own pain, right? Especially when they're able to every day come home and express their pain. So I feel we need to work together, collaborate, and find a way towards each other, because there are unsaid pains from the other side. Believe it or not, there are. So I think communication will go that, you know, that far length. And in the room, there was one thing that one of the guys said, to say they grew up not knowing that they can actually communicate with their woman. I don't know about that, because I feel with the modernized relationships, people have found their own little rooms or corners or whatever to be able to communicate with each other, their own love language, whereby you know, umdwam is not happy right now. And I feel like for a relationship to work, you at least need to have that in place, right? Culture or not, age, whatever, irrelevant, but find that way to speak to one another. That's the one thing that I couldn't really relate with. But everything else in the show, thank you so much, guys, for communicating. And I think it goes a long way. You have no idea. Thank you.
So I think for me, I was lucky enough to be present when you guys were filming. And I remember being there and thinking, I didn't expect to be shocked. And what it's done for me is now in my conversations, there's something that you guys helped me see that maybe somebody else was trying to communicate with me, but I never saw it before, in that the weaponizing of information, because I never saw it like that. I was like, I'm holding this man accountable to what he had previously said. And I never saw it as a weapon, and I see it now as to how it draws back that space, or feels like an attack. So I really appreciated being able to hear these conversations. I really wish that it wasn't such a surprise for like me as a female, because that makes me sad. It makes me sad that you guys have been knowing these things. It's nothing new to you. It's only new to us. So yeah, it was a big learning for me.
Okay, so I have a completely different perception to everybody here. So
There's always that one child in the class.
no, so for me again, it starts to boil down to upbringing and exposure. We all come from different walks of life, right? We share the same color skin, we share gender, we do not. I've never encountered a challenge, right? So from the time I grew up Elokishini in Zim. And this was never a thing. Like, I would slap boys, they'd weep. And it was never, yes, fine, maybe I wasn't in a safe space at the time. But it's one of those elements where vulnerability was never an issue. I've never experienced that as a challenge until I came to South Africa. So I'm here, I'm like, hold on. What do you mean? What do you mean now? And then it gets worse. So my first exposure to South Africa was university. It got worse when I got to corporate. Now they're talking about psychological safety, transformation, diversity, and inclusion. I'm like, askis. But one thing I learned to appreciate, so I'm a born free, according to, so I was raised in a diverse and merged society. And when I came this side, I realized that I expected that of people my age. And I was gender agnostic, and that wasn't the case. So I had to learn and understand. And along the journey, unfortunately, I was probably one of those unsafe humans because I did pass a lot of insensitive comments, which I probably still do. Sorry, Katekani. Sorry, weak. Just a little. But the thing is, for me, it's not new. It was very refreshing. Listening to that 1 hour, 55 minutes was refreshing. I was like, okay, so these conversations actually do happen. I'm accustomed to this from birth, right? I'm not saying every Zimbabwean black woman will. I'm speaking for myself. And the thing is, I come from a township, so I'm wondering how those who grow up in the suburbia had that kind of experience. But I've never had an issue or a challenge. Guys came to me when we were kids, when we were in high school. I had guys approach me, colleagues, brothers, siblings. I've experienced vulnerable men, my uncles, my grandparents. I've experienced vulnerable men my entire life. So for me, this isn't but it is refreshing, and it kind of also takes me out of my own bubble of, hi, but it's the expectation, And again, maybe it challenged me in terms of my flippancy, and again, to the whole point of my journey across the border. Maybe some people hadn't gotten to the point that I took for granted. And when I say people, I'm talking in general. So for me, it's never been about gender. It's just vulnerable. If someone cries, I go, I give you a hug. If someone wants to speak, and particularly, my friend, you all know, I have majority men in my life, and I've never had a vulnerability issue. I feel like even if I have shown my Ntombi side, which is maybe unsafe, they still open up, So listening to what I just listened to now was extremely refreshing, and I would hope that a Marcel, a Boyketlo, a Simni, do not have to have that kind of surprise. It becomes normal. It becomes natural. Because for me, it's just one of those. When I get into a room, and shame to Melo, I was on his case even when I arrived. So it's just one of, it's just one of those situations where my perspective is probably different. But I think it's as a result of my upbringing, and probably the fact that our country developed sooner and quicker in some aspects that maybe growing up me took for granted. But I appreciate, and I am still learning, that there is still a journey. But also it's very humbling for me that a lot of these vulnerable men do still feel they can actually come and have conversations, particularly in corporate where everyone wants to appear macho. What's the point? Like, what is that?
So is the summary then, South African men are weak? King Samar. King Samar.
Yeah, you're a failure. You're a failure.
I'm hearing you, Ntombi, right? And I think there's a difference between acknowledgement and understanding. I think we acknowledge that men are vulnerable. Men are humans, guys. They go through the same feelings, and we acknowledge that a man is sad. But understanding understanding they sad and our sad as women is very different, right? So I'm gonna take it back home with my person, right? After this whole filming, I was like, oh, nah, I'm an understanding person. Me and my person, we talk all the time. And then he's like, baby, there was this one time where I was vulnerable and you told me to man up. And I was like, did I? Or, it was like I acknowledged the vulnerability. In the moment, I was like, okay, babe, we're in the situation together. I acknowledge your sadness. I acknowledge your vulnerability. But the solution is for you or for us to move on. I did not understand that I needed to give him the space to be vulnerable, right? And I think that's what the difference is between maybe Zim and SA or whatever, or a level of understanding, is that we acknowledge, I feel like everyone acknowledges everyone's feelings, but we don't understand, or we don't take the time to understand each other's feelings, male, female, friend, family member, mother, parents' relationship. We do not take the time to understand the other person's perspective or the other person's feelings and be like, if I was this person and I was talking to myself, like, am I putting myself in this person's shoes enough to understand where they're coming from? I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, baby, kya. But what's the solution? Instead of, oh, baby, kya, cry, do what you need to do. We'll figure out things later, but let it go. I've got you. I think that's what we're missing, is the understanding. We acknowledge, but we do not understand. We do not put ourselves in the other person's shoes, especially women do not put themselves in men's shoes, but we expect men to put themselves in women's shoes. And men must now understand where a woman's feeling is coming from. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Okay, I don't know. This one. Okay, this one. No, I don't have much to say, but I think there's a term. Guys, ne? Simnikiwe. There's a term that says indoda ikhali. I can't elaborate on that, but I think men can, right? And I feel that it goes behind this whole thing, Oguti. You being man enough to do this and that, or not enough to be able to cover your needs or whatever your requirements are as a man. And I feel that it goes back to that, but I can't elaborate, guys. I'm a woman, and I know my place. And I think the guys on the panel might know better. But I think there is a difference in terms of South African men versus outside. There is a certain expectation, I think, that maybe we have not matured enough to go beyond versus not. I don't know. I may be wrong.
So I think just to unpack on what you said, I'm Tsonga, I'm not going to repeat it in the X language. I can't even pronounce that. The thing, like a man doesn't cry. I think it comes down to expectations versus empathy. So as women, you can understand, like, we've got feelings, but your expectation supersedes the empathy that you would have in that moment, where it's like, okay, great, you're sad, but like, what's the plan? Like, how are we moving forward? Like, your expectation is for me as a man to have a plan before you can have that empathy to be like, yo, my person actually just needs me to hold space. It's not like I need you to solve the problem. I don't need you to be overly understanding, but just having that space where I can have that moment of vulnerability. And I think, like, your point makes perfect sense. And I think that's where the break typically comes between the two genders.
Sorry?
Firstly, as I always say, Linz, this is awesome, right? I think it's, and maybe because I'm a word nerd, because I'm a writer and a poet. So one of the things for me that I'm very passionate about and pedantic about is the usage of our language and our words, and how as a society, we've kind of fallen asleep at the wheel of how we use our words and why they're so important, how we have to actually be conscious, aware, and intentional about the words we use because they have meaning. And when we're irresponsible with them, they inherently create an imbalance in empathy and in our communication. So something like what she says, and then your brain switches to, so South African men are weak. So you've already put that energy out into the room. Now she has to then elaborate, and she's like, babe, no, that's not what I meant, and so forth. And so I think we have to, be actually more intentional about the words that we're using, and be okay with being emotional and being sensitive. And being like, but babe, you're being emotional. Yes, I am emotional, because this is an emotional thing. Maybe I am being sensitive, but you hurt my feelings. Or one of the things I've gotten used to saying these days is I don't have the mental or emotional capacity for this conversation right now. Can we park it and do it at a later stage? Because right now, you're not going to get the mo you're looking for, because I'm not here right now. So can we park it till later? And just normalizing that stuff as normal culture, and be okay with just being vulnerable and normalizing vulnerability across the bat. So yeah, that's all I got to say on that. Drop mic.
Uzoikoka, my dropper. Yeah. So I have a question for the gents. It's maybe a very silly one. How did it feel to watch your own reflections in your own words, with your own facial expressions and your own truth being reflected back to you on screen?
It was very interesting. I can say it that way, right? Like, so I think we mentioned it. A lot of disclaimers coming through. So you and there's a reason. I think the cancel culture was mentioned, but that wasn't the major reason for me, to be honest with you. Sorry, before I answer about how I felt now, but just in general about the experience of actually being in front of the camera. I think you're asking me to be vulnerable about my personal experiences, where I brought up my mother, my mom, and I brought up personal experiences that I can't even remember if I've shared with my previous partners, right, or to the extent that I've shared it, right. But I found myself in a room with guys who are sharing things that are personal to them, that are on camera, and that's why I think the disclaimer came quite often. That like, it's on camera, guys. Like let's not shy away. We're in the age of social media, so everything, right. To bring it back to today, now that the camera part has taken place, now you're watching yourself like, damn, what did I say again? Like, to what extent did I go there and whatnot? And I think it goes hand in hand a little bit with also a little bit of reservations and being scared of how you communicated. And you weren't as free as I felt. I still wasn't 100% free, all right? So watching myself, it's cringeworthy sometimes to look and be like, what are you going to say next, right? Like, and to what extent is like, ooh, how was that? So it's a first and foremost, being vulnerable itself to yourself is a challenge, right? Like for a lot of people. Now you're sharing it in camera, so seeing it, you then with all these other societal things, and by societal I mean digital, social media, and things like that. It increases that little bit of anxiety for me, at the very least, to say, but what did I say? And I know this footprint is going to be everlasting there. But besides that, I can be successful in 5 years and be this big shot, whatever. Someone will always reference Ulindile's video here, like type of thing, and I'm PS. That. Yeah, but, and my PS story. She doesn't like PS. Good interview. So what happened in the PS story? You know what I mean? Like, so it's. I'm not going to lie. It's a nerve-wracking experience, and even coming here, I thought about it a few times to be like, yo. Fair, do you still remember like a lot of the things you said? Because for that little bit of time, I was conscious I'm being recorded, but I was also free, right? Like I was also able to say a lot of things freely. And I found myself saying things, Lindy didn't give us the questions. So you didn't prepare anything, right? Like you're answering off the dome, you're just going, right? And go now we are they're doing their things and they're also speaking, so you're feeling a bit more comfortable. But it's like a normal conversation. You won't remember every single sentence you said, but the camera remembers. So now you don't know Ulindele's editing, to what extent did it go? The microphones, to what extent did it go? So when you watch yourself, it's also, but having watched myself in the time I watched myself, it's refreshing to see that, look, I overcame that, right? Because I ended up saying to myself, okay, I'm here for this reason and this is what I'm going to say. It doesn't take away, I'm still anxious and it's a bit nerve-wracking watching yourself on a big screen with other people eating popcorn. I joke around about it now, but he's staring, but that's not a script, that's my life. That's my life. Right? So, no, that's not a script, that's my life. So it's my first time, I can probably say that, my first time seeing this like for myself, like a whole thing where I'm featuring actively like that, and being able to also judge myself on what I said, because I judged myself while I was watching it now, eating my own popcorn. I judged myself on some of the comments. I was like, but did you articulate it in the manner that you wanted to? And the concern was, I think we mentioned cancel culture and other things and the society remembering. It wasn't even a, did you offload? Did you articulate yourself in the way that you were, so that people don't misinterpret certain things? You raised a question now, it may have been misinterpreted next door, Apagum. And now, but that wasn't, okay, it was on camera, but like, izinto ezinjalo became a thing for me. And even that, even coming here to be in this part of the discussion, I was worried, like, what if I don't exactly recall what exactly I said and then I'm being asked tough questions about it? So it was a bit of a nerve-wracking experience, I'm not going to lie. Seeing yourself and being vulnerable, it's the equivalent. I know a lot of us, sorry, I might be hogging the mic a little bit, but we said when it was recording, it almost felt a little bit of like a therapy session, just offloading, right? People who have gone to therapy, have you ever seen a video of your therapy sessions? Would you want to see a video of your therapy session? Yakoka, you are lying. You are lying. I'm telling you, sitting on Oprah's couch, you are lying. But it kind of felt a little bit like that, you know, because you went there knowing you were going to talk about things, but you weren't sure to what extent you're going to be vulnerable. And then you found yourself being vulnerable, okay? Now it's time for people to watch you being vulnerable. And then after watching you being vulnerable, you're still going to have a discussion session asking about you being vulnerable, you know? So it's not an easy thing, I'm not going to lie. It's not an easy thing. Having said that, I don't regret it per se. Hopefully your editing on YouTube is good. Yeah, but I don't regret anything I said. So yeah, it's a shock therapy of sort in its own way. Because I maintain you're all lying if you said you'd want to see a video of yourself in therapy. Not in front of others. Okay, but my therapy session was here. But yeah, thanks. Oh, teaser.
I also share a lot of those same sentiments, because we were basically put in a room. Most of us didn't actually know each other, so it's a room of gents that you don't know. You're having a brand new chat, and it was very nice to be able to feel free and talk that actual way. I do agree. Watching it though was not as nice. Like. I think it's difficult to re-watch yourself and like, hey, I could have done better there, and I don't like what I said there. But when I thought about it more, I started to feel that maybe everything happened in the right way that it was meant to. And after actually listening to some of the chats now about the disclaimers, I think that is good, man. I think that. We were just having a chat. We were just having, and then I think people can't be perfect. People can't be, you won't always communicate something the way that you wanted it to be communicated. Like, And even miscommunication is also part of communication. Because then you communicate no more, okay, sharp, like, what did you mean by that? Kind of, what's the thing? So,
Men are weak, that's what you
yeah, but even there, right? You have a conversation, and then you see, okay, no, you know what, you meant that. I actually heard that. Then we find like what exactly we're trying to say. So then we have the actual communication. But I mean, yeah, watching it, but yeah, that's how I felt.
You know what's going to be interesting is watching and reacting to a video of you talking about watching and reacting to a video of you sharing your feelings. That's. Hey, bro. No, man. I think for me it was like the weirdest thing was watching myself being emotional, because I don't think of myself as an emotional person. Like I don't, when I'm talking, recognize like the changes in my voice, like the bass disappears and my face cracks up a little bit. So seeing that, like, for me was it was jarring. But also I think it was a good thing. Like, it's there might have been certain controversial things said, but hey, I said what I said. I stand on what I said. Like, that's what you feel. And I think through the process, you kind of, you sort of, it gives you that opportunity to take a step back and be like, okay, to the point the gents made, like, is this what I was actually trying to get across? Is this actually an opinion that I hold and I stand on? And it just gives you that opportunity to kind of reflect. So, as jarring as it was, I think it was like net. It was a good experience to have.
My next question is to the room in general. I think as I was reflecting on the conversation, because I had to sit and edit all of the stuff, and then, releasing the clips and looking at people's reactions and stuff, is I think there's one truth that we can't run away from, which is the fact that men and women need each other. And we've somehow lost each other. And for me, part of my journey is trying to understand how do we bridge that gap. And one thing that's quite evident to me, at least from some of what the guy said on film, is we're still not at that point where we can honestly be honest with each other. Because if some of the stuff you ladies are hearing, it's a surprise to you, I'm like, benijola nabo bani? Kanti when you're posting vacation in me and him forever, how is this a shock to you? Right? And then conversely, us men, in terms of the work that needs to be done, okay, great, now we offloaded, right? And just choosing an example of a topic we spoke about, vulnerability being weaponized and stuff. Why are we not closing the feedback loop a couple of days later to be like, as in, babe, actually 5 days ago, do the same thing that we say they do. 5 days ago, what you said, 1, 2, 3, 4, that wasn't cool. I didn't appreciate that because of 1, 2, 3, 4. So, nijola nabo bani, why ningakhulumi?
So,
Thank you for coming.
no, so what I wanted to ask actually in connection to this vulnerability being weaponized is that if the guys aren't able to be vulnerable with their partners, then who are they vulnerable with? Who are they comfortable enough to express how they feel? Because you need to be vulnerable, right, as a human being. And I feel like that, I think one of the guys mentioned it. If you're not being vulnerable, you're missing a gap in connecting with someone, because that's how you connect, that's how you become closer with your partner, your friend, your family, by being vulnerable. So how are they, like to your question as well, how are they closing that gap of vulnerability? And if not with their partners, then who? Where do they get to offload and express themselves? If this wasn't a session that was had, where would they have like openly, freely expressed how they feel and like be emotional, be sensitive, and feel like it won't be weaponized?
Can I counter that with another question, if I may?
I wanted to respond to you specifically. And I think it touches on what Simni mentioned about Indodai, Kali, etc. I think the fact of the reality is they don't, right? Because that's how they've been socialized. So in my opinion, we're in this age where we're talking about vulnerability, men must open up and all this kind of stuff. And to Ntombi's point earlier about childhoods and how we're all raised and stuff, the reality also is none of men being vulnerable has been modeled in most households, right? You come from a system where, whether we like it or not, historically, because of the migrant labor, there wasn't even a father figure in the house. And even if he was there, how did he even teach you to even talk about feelings and all of that kind of stuff, right? And if you talk to you about feelings, you were probably raised by your mother, who then instills, as we learned, these things about this is what a man should be. Then now, we all act surprised and shocked when now we've had collective consciousness about the importance of vulnerability, and we're like, but why are men not doing this? I'm 30 plus years old. You are expecting me to unlearn something that society has forced on me my entire childhood and growing up and stuff. And you're like, and therefore, maybe it leads to what Yolisa was talking about. Then, of course, then therapy terms will then be weaponized. Oh, you're not opening up. Oh, you're being defensive. Oh, you're this, that, and... What are we doing? That's my answer, or my opinion to what you're saying. That no, they don't, because I don't think we've had that modeled to us. At least I'm speaking for myself.
Papayas. Yeah, I think you're spot on, Liz. I think you're spot on in terms of vulnerability, because, to be fair, the vulnerability of men, through my experience as well, is also very limited to. It's limited. Let me actually just say it's limited, right? Because men are vulnerable or are limited in their vulnerability to one another, right? I've had best friends for over 20 years. I will still give a portion of the story so that I don't expose myself to be to that extent vulnerable. Yeah, bo? I will still give worse with family even, you know what I mean? But a large part of it, I think, does sit with that individual without having the platform that you're speaking of, right? To then expose it. It's ironic that when we do speak on it, it's on another extreme of social media, right? Because when you don't speak on it, you're limited, you're secluded, right? But now you're not meeting it in between. Let me go. Now as I sit here, I've gone and said, I'm going to partake and speak my life, my emotions and certain things on a platform that's no tusa, you know what I mean? But it's an extreme platform from where I come from in terms of my vulnerability, right? But it's still for me a step in the righteous direction. I can be victim to certain things. I'm not saying I will be. I'm not that special, but I could be judged by certain people, etc., for being this particular way, and that's okay, right? When I agreed to it, I knew full well that this is going to be at a certain platform, right? It doesn't take away the fact that it is very scary. It's why the disclaimers ended up coming. There's so many disclaimers because of fear of misinterpretation or fear of not articulating yourself. And even with your closest friends, there's just that fear of still not articulating it correctly, not being understood correctly. Having said that, there's a fear of this guy might tell me actually what I need to do and I don't want to action that particular thing, for instance. I'm not going to take that away. But the aspect of vulnerability is one, and as I'm speaking now, I find it so interesting that I have had friends my whole life close friends, people I consider family. And some of the things I said on camera were things I never said to them, right? Even some of these guys know, they were there when the PS things happened and whatnot, but they don't know the story, right? But then I went and, hell, I decided I'm going to be a star and go and I'm going to be staring. And then now I'm just like, it's two major extremes. And that has to speak to, there's no median, at least how I feel, to say that here, at this point, I can be vulnerable enough with even Amachita, because Amachita can share a lot and be vulnerable to some extent, but there's always a, we are man, you're true. Because Amachita can weaponize too, by the way. I just have to say that. Amachita can weaponize it too. So it's a very interesting thing. And I'll look at it a few years from now and be like, was it the right platform to go and do it? You know what I mean? It's way too late now. And this has get us in podcast as new topics, super boy. But it's a very interesting thing for me because I think the theme I'm taking a lot from this is vulnerability. And I think that's for me personally. I think other guys will take a different theme. But for me, the theme I'm taking vulnerability and the fact that even coming here, even in the morning, I had a little bit of a ooh moment. Says enough for me to say that Dioyika, and I'm not exactly sure where I can express my vulnerability, and that I may have gone too far with all these cameras. But at the same time, I felt relieved having said it when I was in that session, because if I wasn't comfortable enough, I wouldn't have said it. And so I don't regret, but Nyoyika. I don't think I answered the question, but anyway, that's my comment.
No, I think, so for me, it's more, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't speak, because it's, like, I can say I speak from a point of privilege because I was fortunate enough to grow up with a father who did model a version of vulnerability with me in the conversations that he would have with me. But even with that said, even though I saw it being modeled, there's still so much going on within society around me as a guy being vulnerable that, to the points being made, like even with my closest of friends, like, they'll know 20% of the struggles that I'm dealing with. Like, we are not all, because we don't all get to see that version of vulnerability being modeled, you'll find that I'll come to you as my boy and I'll be vulnerable about a certain thing, and then your reaction says to me, "Gutai, it's not a line that I can cross," right? And so as a result, like those openings for you to be a vulnerable, bare naked person are so few and far between in society, especially for guys, right? Where ladies probably have a bit more room held for them to be able to just let it all out, and guys don't necessarily have that. And it's like, I feel like it's bigger than us as individuals. It's bigger than how individually we were raised and the environments that we exist in. Because moving through the world, you are interacting with so many other people, and it's almost like you're walking through a field of landmines where you say the wrong thing in front of the wrong person, and all of a sudden, like, so many things about your life can change just because you opened up to make yourself vulnerable in that moment, modeled or not.
Okay, so as I've been sitting here listening to everybody speak, there are two words that I've heard a lot, right? Vulnerability and articulation. So from what I'm hearing, there seems to be a direct correlation between vulnerability and articulation. So my question is, as men, what are you guys doing to try and make those two concepts work together and coincide?
I honestly like to answer that question very bluntly. I don't think it's a thing that we can do because, like, one of the things that was said during the discussion was, as a man, before you can be vulnerable, you need to go back and forth in your mind. How is this thing that I'm saying going to be received? Play that conversation over and over and over again until you get to something that you think, okay, this isn't going to create an explosion and we can actually have a conversation. So as much as I can sit here and think about what your reaction is going to be and try and articulate myself in the best way possible, when I am being vulnerable as a man, how you receive it is how you're going to receive it. And to the point I made earlier, because your expectation of me as a man supersedes your empathy for me as a person, there's no level of articulation that I can give to you unless you're in a place where you've done the work to kind of figure out, okay, this person is a person before they are a man. And I think the problem right now is that in society, you got to be a man before you're a person. And I think like that's the flip that needs to happen. I don't think that's a thing that men need to do. Like, I can sit here and be vulnerable until the cows come home. I can sit here and articulate myself until the world ends. But if you aren't prepared to receive that part of it, okay, this person is being vulnerable now. Let me put aside all of the preconceived notion, all the prejudices about what a man should be versus what this guy in front of me is being right now. Like, I don't think you're ever going to get to a point where the vulnerability can happen in a constructive and productive way. It comes down more to the receiver than the person giving it, if I can put it that way. I don't know if you guys maybe have a different take on it.
No, I think I definitely agree with that. I think that also, just to actually add, because I think maybe something that we haven't talked about is, I don't think that the statements that we are saying go out to everyone. We aren't even saying that the actual situations that we are in now, these apply to. It's just that there are maybe certain experiences that we have actually had that haven't been actually shared. So it's a good time to have a platform to have those. I don't think that we are actually saying that every relationship does not allow for vulnerability. Everyone is doing this or everyone is doing that. But I think that there's not enough space to go communicate certain things in actually today's world. And I think this was just an actual opportunity to go and explore all of those things. Yeah.
Maybe let me quickly add. What are we doing, or what am I doing? You know what? I continue to be vulnerable. I think that's what essentially I'm doing. I continue to be vulnerable, despite everything that I feel I've gone through and all the teachings that told me not to be vulnerable. I still continue to be vulnerable. I still continue to do a deep introspection, because vulnerability is also a bit of an introspection. So I think my answer to that is that I continue to be vulnerable. In terms of the articulation, it's a bit harder to answer for me personally, because I think we all think we articulate in a certain way. It's just how it's received from both parties, really. So that one's a bit harder. But in terms of vulnerability, I think mine is to continue to be vulnerable, and it's not easy. It's far from it. You continue to be vulnerable in all aspects. It's still it's not easy, man. But the choice is to continue to be vulnerable, because what other option do I have? Then I don't sit and I don't come to these sessions, and then I sit at home and.
Aski, sorry, I think that I got so caught in the first part that I actually forgot to answer the actual question. So on my part, I'm still vulnerable, like even now. I actually still do actually articulate like even now. I don't think that I've necessarily changed. So like if you ask me like what am I doing, I think that I'm doing what I've been actually doing. I still actually still actually communicate. I'm actually still actually vulnerable, and I'm in a space where I'm allowed to do actually that.
So, I don't. You guys have sorted out the order. You guys know the order. It's myself.
Okay. Hey? Oh, I didn't speak. I handed over. Oh, yeah. So I love what Offense said because it was very closely linked with what I want to say. But again, so firstly to you, my lady, you articulated something I hear a lot, and I appreciate that you voiced it because it doesn't come out often from women. So the question I have for you, and feel free to either answer it or think about it, is if your man, right, is not vulnerable to you, you are saying who is he then vulnerable to? Are you comfortable with him being vulnerable either to his boys, to his sisters, or to his lady friends? And the reason the third one is no, and it's factual. The reason, and it's because the point was, who are they being vulnerable to? They're being vulnerable. But if he's being vulnerable to a lady friend, right, who, by the way, you met, who, by the way, has been in his life, he did not hide from you, and has embraced you as a sister, so to speak, because her friend's happy, she loves you, right? But his level of comfort is to open up to her. But she is not open up. He's being vulnerable, just not to you, right? So how would you then handle that? Because here, the thing is your man being vulnerable? Jay. Because then that's covered. He's being vulnerable at home, to his friends, to his lady friends, right? Just not to you. And then, again, to your point, and I love that we have a couple here, in the sense that he called you out. You thought, I get it. But he's like, no, babes, you actually don't. And I respect you for that, right? You're grown, because I know you from, and I appreciate that because that creates that whole safe space. And another reason I ask is because I'm his friend. She met me through him. He's been vulnerable to me, but I do not know if the same vulnerability was extended to her. And it's not a competition, but again, it's just that whole thing. And sometimes in those instances, it enables the awkward conversation. And they can both attest. I will sit both of them down, or I'll sit them down individually because of conversations I've had with each respective party. So that's what I wanted, And then to you, gentlemen, we talk about the vulnerability. So in my mind, I'm thinking there's conscious vulnerability, there's subconscious vulnerability. I feel like if we overemphasize the point of vulnerability, we don't realize that there's points where you've actually been vulnerable, but you haven't thought about it. So there's no pressure to articulate. There's no camera, right? But it's something you've done. I loved what you said, that you were free to open up to people you've never met. That is powerful, particularly for black men. Because, God, come on, us, I mean, I can sit and have cocktails with you. We'll chill there. We will, but it's not the same. And I appreciate that. The reason I'm wanting to understand the distinction between conscious and subconscious is because, again, back to the point I mentioned earlier, I have more male friends than I do female friends. I have learned a lot more about males than I have about women. My friend here calls me out a lot, which shows me which shows me I have which shows me I have a very long way to go, right, on that journey. But the reason I speak to subconscious and conscious is I find the subconscious, like, it's such a sweet spot because it just comes out. You might not realize you're being subconsciously vulnerable. I may not realize you're being subconscious. But later when I sit down, I'm like, because to your detriment, I know all of you. So I'm like, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4. They've all been subconsciously vulnerable. This is why I'm raising it. You didn't realize it. And until I thought about it in this context, I didn't realize you had, right? So that dialogue does happen. 5, you too. So but it's how I have received it. I've received it as a you may not have intended it as a vulnerability, but it came out subconscious. And I think those are the most beautiful because it shows that you are comfortable to open up and, to be, right? And there's certain things you just know, and the weaponizing is a thing. So you just know that, and it applies across the board where you just think, okay. And again, sometimes, if I can, I'm not justifying weaponizing, but I feel like some people in our lives, myself included in other people's lives, we unconsciously weaponize because we love that person. So, Lwazi will tell me, Setu upset him, and then now Lwazi and Setu are lovey-dovey. Then I get upset. I'm like, but the other day you said Setu XYZ. Exactly, right? But and that's me unconsciously weaponizing content you have trusted me with in your conscious or subconscious vulnerability, right? So, and it's across the board. It's not necessarily it's not necessarily in a romantic relationship. It can be in friends. You said it about Uma Wako as well. Uguti, in the context of you lost your cousin and you had a moment, and and I think it always hits you the hardest when it's people you also love in return, and they are that close to you. So, yeah. I'm gonna answer when it gets to me, when it comes back to me. Okay. Are you sure?
Okay, I'm gonna come to that side because with my okay, so I've been going back and forth about whether I'm gonna ask this question or not because I don't want people to withdraw, right? I felt like, I think I'm going to invalidate feelings if I ask this question, and it's not a big deal. It's not a big question. Don't be scared. But the thing that I'm struggling with, and I don't even know where to go with this, is I don't understand what happens when you are vulnerable and then you feel like you've been attacked. Why don't you let them know? Why don't you push further? Like, why doesn't that happen? Because when I hear when I hear some of the things that you're saying, I'm like, yeah, these are human problems. We miscommunicate with each other. And it shouldn't stop there. It shouldn't be because you didn't understand me or you now use that thing against me. Yes, to be vulnerable, you say something that someone can use against you, and that's the risk that you take. So I don't understand fully.
Yeah, well, I'll start it off. I think it comes back to what we were talking about, how we're socialized. So in the very same context, we talked about happy wife, happy life, right? So as a starting point, if you're socialized that your own feelings and how your partner hurts you doesn't matter because what matters is her, it therefore means in that moment when things are weaponized against you, it doesn't matter. You need to take it on the chin, yeah? And the same thing that we all watched, someone said, I was raised to not fight with girls. I must calculate, if I'm going to confront this thing, how is this thing going to end? And it's never going to end well for me. Therefore, and I will leave it there.
Wow.
I think what I'd like to add to Lindile is, like, this is a conversation that my person and I have had, right? and it's like we're unraveling the conversation for you guys in pieces. But like, for me, a major thing was like, as a guy, you want your person to look at you and see you in a certain way. Like, I don't know if you guys can relate, but like, as a man, you want your person to see you as a man. And so when you are vulnerable and in that moment your person makes you feel like less of a man because of their reaction, like, it's like there's levels to you breaking down, right? And in that moment, the initial feeling that you were having kind of takes us a backseat to, like my person doesn't see me as a man anymore. My person doesn't trust me as a man anymore. And I think it is incredibly difficult to, first of all, be in the middle of going through something and then also having to contend with that. So it's like, it's not like I was talking to you and then you cut me off and were talking over me and we can address it quickly. Like, it's a very layered conversation because, first of all, I'm being vulnerable, I feel exposed. And in that moment, your reaction made me feel like less of a man. And so like, it's a very difficult sort of thing to engage on in that moment. And so I think I get your point around, like, once the dust is settled, definitely circle back and try and address that and engage that with your person. But to give you the short answer, like, in the moment, there's so many layers to it that it is difficult to try and engage and unpack all of that without you now devolving it into becoming a fight. So it's one of those things where in the moment you'll choose your battles. Like, I'm in a place where I'm not feeling at my best. Do I really want to be getting into a fight right now? Right? So you end up not addressing things because you're avoiding that direction, so to speak.
You asking the question led me to another question, and I'm glad we have a woman around to assist in my, at least, processing of it. But do women really, when you think about it, and I'm asking a genuine question, really want men to be vulnerable? Right? And if so, well, before you jump to it, if so, do women think about the process that it takes for a man to be vulnerable in that sense, right? Because it's easy to say yes, and I agree, I think. Most women will say yes, yeah, we want you to be vulnerable. But you think about the process that it takes for a guy to then be vulnerable. Having established, okay, we have societal history and how you're brought up and et cetera, is that an actual thought process over and above, I want you to be vulnerable? Is the other part of it, what does it take for this guy to be vulnerable? And in that question being asked, then what do I need to do to make sure that he's comfortable in this particular space, right? And unfortunately or fortunately, when I think about it and asking that question, I'm just like, I would expect my partner, if she's saying I must be vulnerable, to then think about what it takes for me to get to that point. I think we can't argue the gender societal thing of men being vulnerable. I don't think that's the point of discussion here, that it takes a lot for men to be vulnerable. I stand to be corrected, but I don't think that's the point of discussion here. But then my question then to the floor at large is then, but do you actually think about what it takes to be there? And if that is the case, what your reaction is to that particular thing of this guy being vulnerable? Because it's also easy to maybe to be like, oh, you're vulnerable, and you respond, and I was so vulnerable, your reaction wasn't exactly what I have a little bit of more expectation to say, sondela baby, is sondela, you know what I mean? But like, just that thought process about it, because it seems easy to say, I want you to be open and vulnerable to me, but not think about the process that it takes to get to that particular point, and then your actions, or not even your actions, I'm going to use a big word, but your responsibility to handle that vulnerability. Because as my partner, it's your responsibility to handle that vulnerability. In the same way, when you're vulnerable to me or you're emotional to me, it's my responsibility. So that's food for thought. Question yours, Afe, right?
Yeah.
I saw Matapelos.
Please hold for me. Thank you. So I actually wanted to say before that question was asked that vulnerability is actually difficult for anyone. I myself personally struggle with vulnerability. So it's not an easy thing. And I think sometimes it's a matter of that person's level of vulnerability. Because for me, as someone who struggles with vulnerability, when someone sometimes is vulnerable, I don't know what's the right thing to do. So it's not a lack of empathy, it's just, ooh, I myself have some feelings that I've suppressed. So when you come at me and you're expressing certain things, I'm like, it's touchy for me because it goes deeper for me as well. So vulnerability is difficult, not just for men. Vulnerability is difficult for a lot of us, right? But you just have to take a chance. You have to, even with your friends, like you guys were saying, like you can be vulnerable with your friends and they can still weaponize it, your male friends, right? And that's the cost sometimes. But the benefit outweighs the cost in terms of the more vulnerable you are, the more connection you build with the people that are around you. And to answer the question that she had asked me in terms of what if my man is being vulnerable with his female friends, male friends, whoever, I don't think any one person should bear the responsibility of taking care of their partner. I think you should have a community of people that are supporting you. Your partner can never fulfill all your needs anyway. So I'd be grateful that there's other people who can help in that regard. Of course, it would be difficult. I would love to be that person, but it's not realistic, right? Yeah. I myself have my friends, my family, and other people that support me show up better as well in my relationship. But I think in general, vulnerability is difficult for anyone. And you just have to keep at it because the benefit definitely outweighs the cost. And you must know that sometimes you're not going to be received in the right manner, not just from your partner, from anyone. Like you said, even your mother, anyone cannot receive that vulnerability in the right way, but you just have to keep, because it benefits you so much. It provides so much healing to be vulnerable. That's something I'm learning myself, just to be more vulnerable, and it's so freeing. So more than worrying about how other people will react, your partner, your friends, whoever, just doing it for yourself and your own healing. And you'll realize that people that are for you will actually become closer to you for being vulnerable. You'll actually get your tribe in that way. You'll attract the people that are right for you when you become more vulnerable and they accept it and they know what to do with it and they empathize with you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because it speaks to, well, firstly, I've got a comment based on what you've just shared, and then I've got a question. But what I was going to say about communication, about that back and forth, is that I think the tricky thing about communication is that it's not actually a one-way street. It's a two-way street, and you can never dictate how you're going to be received. And that's the difficult thing about communication. I can come through and I can be honest and tell you where I'm at and what I want from all of this, but I can never dictate how that's going to land. Oh, and I recently had a similar, towards the end of last year, I had to have some hard conversations at work with people. And I said openly that I cannot dictate how you are going to react, but at the end of this meeting, you will be clear. We will all be clear with where I stand, and I will be clear with where you stand. How you receive it is up to you. And I mean, luckily for me, I'm blessed that it actually went well. And that then leads me to the second question that I was going to have, is that in this context, we've spoken about vulnerability in the context of relationships, right? Whether it's personal or romantic. But where do we stand about vulnerability in the workplace? Because we spend an equal amount of time in the workplace as we do everywhere else, right? If not more, actually. So just generally, just a question to the room, anybody can answer this, but how do we feel about those honest, difficult to have, I can see Kat is smiling, but those honest, difficult to have conversations in the workplace? So we have vulnerability in the workplace.
So, in the bigger context, then I see the timer is busy ticking away there. In the bigger context, this conversation was meant as an initiator of a larger conversation. So going back to what I said earlier about, I think men and women need each other, and I think there's a lot of connection that needs to be made on this particular topic around vulnerability and all of that kind of stuff. And therefore, because vulnerability is a key thing that's coming out, there's a lot of subsequent, I think, themes we can explore around the different layers of vulnerability.